Chronicle 1, Hope and Decay. Chapter 2. The opening shots from Auriel's squad found their lumbering targets easily through the firing lanes between the half-dozen buildings surrounding the monastery. Bodies of filth fell and spilled vile concoctions out of new wounds. 1, 2, 3, Auriel counted, her face twisted into a snarl beneath her helmet. 4, 5, 6. She looked behind the two remaining living corpses in firing range. The plague-empowered battle brothers were out of sight.
They're splitting up!
Auriel shouted over their localized conveyance system as the zombie duo was dispatched.
Eyes to the sides!
Discipline kicked in for her and her subordinates. A knife-like chop of her hand sent Julene and Charity bolting ahead to border each corner of the now crumbling monastery in preparation. An inward fist signalled Isidore to station herself behind a compact storage hall at the squad's rear, a counter to any potential ambush. A swirl of her index finger commanded Danny's and Clyra to flank each side of Auriel as they closed in near the main building. 2 fingers and a nod made Gwen advance towards the ruined shell of a structure to the right of the cenobium. While they were still several meters away, the toll of multiple dissonant bells chimed over the air from behind the monastery. Auriel suppressed a shiver, pumped a fist towards the ground for Danny's and Clyra to hold their position, then darted to the demolished cathedral door. As she reached her location, 2 dense, unfamiliar cracks split the air nanoseconds before an agonized scream sounded over the sisters' communication line.
"Enemy firearm right,"
Charity announced over her teammate's shriek, repositioning to Auriel's rear and sending bullets out of sight.
Focus.
Auriel tensed as every muscle begged to turn around.
Distraction is death.
Gwen!
Clyra and Isidore cried nearly in unison to their bellowing comrade. Boots clomped behind Auriel as standard-issue rifle shots rang out around her. Another sister's firearm popped to her left, followed by a fleshy squelch. Auriel watched the receiver's downfall through a massive fissure that spanned across the middle of the edifice. The fallen zombie's 2 companions rushed inside the compound, sticking to the perimeter wall and ignoring her presence 60 feet away. Auriel took aim at the monastery's intruders, before a screech next to her jolted her attention much too late. Claws and crude weapons crashed against her armor, the initial blows nothing but dull thuds that her thick covering deadened with ease. Her eyes grew wide as something sharp ripped between 2 plates of her armor, and she roared with a grimace. Practiced motions triggered her to unsheath her energy sword, fend off the remaining assault, sidestep, and release expertly aimed bullets from her rifle. Discoloured gore exploded against the sidewall as 2 of the 3 assailants were dispatched. The third reeled from the retaliation, but remained upright.
"Behind!"
Charity declared as a rifle round from behind Auriel knocked the last zombie to the ground. While the enemy's bodily spray still hung in the air, Auriel was shouting,
Find cover! Shoot out of sight!
Gwen responded with a growl.
I'm gonna burn thee!
Another thunderous crack cut Gwen's retort short as her helmet's communication line went fatally quiet.
Focus,
Auriel repeated, steeling herself against the remorse that attempted an internal assault. Flickers of commotion edged at the corners of her visor as thumps and grunts of melee transmitted into her headpiece. An eerie boom sounded, and an anonymous pained gasp relayed on their LCS. A separate agonized shout filled Auriel's ears as Clyra fought off a new set of havoc-tainted cadavers to her right.
I've got them,
she reassured through gritted teeth, butting the unholy trio back with her rifle.
Focus!
Isidore bellowed as she charged beside Auriel to take aim at the Havoc brother responsible for her friend's demise. Auriel joined in, seeing this monster as a top priority threat. Several of their bullets found homes in its body, causing the oversized warrior to stagger. It regained itself, then barreled forward with an unnatural vigour, the peal of its bells clanging with each stomp as it fired virulent rounds from an antiquated rifle, but not at her. Auriel glimpsed behind her briefly, watching Charity ragdoll backwards from the impact, then snapped her eyes back in front of her.
Focus!
A single boiling tear rolled down her cheek against her will.
Need an assist, TPT.
Julene yelled over the comms with a tremor.
New blood engaged.
Denise.
Auriel's eyes widened.
En route,
she said. Before turning to proceed to her next target, she saw an opening and executed one of the walkers engaged with Clara, who inhaled sharply and turned towards Auriel, clearly taken off guard. Auriel watched the split second it took for an infected appendage to rip deeply into Clara's side, forcing her to drop her gun and rack with pain. Several stifled cries echoed in Auriel's helmet as Clara grasped the invading limb. A pang tightened in Auriel's gut, imploring her to intervene. But she continued her redirection towards Denise. Isidore yelled vengefully, and the sound of bullets cracking enemy plate resounded behind Auriel, followed by sister rounds shredding flesh.
For the God Queen.
Clara's feeble voice whispered in Auriel's headset.
focus, focus, focus.
Denise was hobbling towards Auriel, one arm dangling limply at her side. Blood streaked through chinks in her armor, and a hole cratered near her stomach. Even in this condition, she managed to rear back with her rifle tucked under her good arm and fire a bullet into the filth-encrusted brute, enraging it. Auriel raised her own gun as the former battle brother unleashed a supernatural, jarring roar. Its head exploded into visceral chunks of bone, armor, and ichor. Its bloated body slumped to the ground, revealing Julene as the final shooter peering from behind a monolith. A discomforting silence blanketed the carnage as each warrior surveyed the situation before them. Isidore hurried to Clara and knelt to examine her wounds. Julene scanned the top of the nearby buildings for hostile vantage points before advancing to Denise, who was now slumped onto a pile of debris. A command from Auriel broke the agitated stillness.
Isidore, grab Gwen's flamer. Burn the corpses, anything tainted. We can't let this spread.
Isidore hovered over Clara, clenching her fist.
That's an order. We have to be quick.
Auriel spat with a wince as her energy sword found its home back at her side, the wound near her ribs sending needles through her body.
Yes, superior,
Isidore said snidely. She sauntered away from Clara's corpse, her rifle hanging on its strap at her side. She loomed over Gwen's lifeless form before flipping it to access the required weapon. Auriel was thankful her helmet remained intact. Her face beat red-hot from the losses, tears dripped down her face behind her mask, and a scream lurked behind her lips. She walked to Charity's final resting place and bowed her head.
God Queen, may these martyrs' souls be of use for your return.
Disregarding the pain beseeching her attention, Auriel raised her master rifle and fired a single bullet through the sister's helmet, alerting the other still living squadmates.
What was that for?
Isidore shouted. Auriel walked past her without a word. Another quick shot blasted into Gwen's visor, a brief pink mist popping from the new hole. Isidore jumped into Auriel's path, gripping the master rifle.
Wormholes, Auriel, what are you doing?
The bewilderment in her voice was understandable, but Auriel didn't have the capacity to explain.
Isidore, stand.
Auriel began. A gurgle behind Isidore drew both of their attention. They noticed Clara's ruined body twitch slightly. Without warning, the now corrupted host jerked up and leapt at Isidore. Auriel locked onto the fresh convert with her master rifle and squeezed its trigger, releasing the mercy in its chamber. Auriel's gut tensed as Natalea aimed and fired at the white helmet of an ex-ally, causing it to erupt.
Send a bullet through their heads.
Natalea growled, unleashing a volley of rounds into the corridor.
You have to disrupt their neural signaling.
Shouldn't we try to save them?
Auriel screamed into their communication line, shooting with careful consideration to avoid any infected comrades. Shambling corpses lurched and dropped as they were shot advancing towards Natalea and Auriel.
We don't have that luxury, Ori. Once dead, their bodies belong to Havoc.
Natalea pumped bullets into another ex-warrior along with several plague walkers.
Find that blasted evac route. Distraction is death.
Shooting behind her as she ran, Natalea ushered Auriel forward to find their path. Auriel shamefully took a moment to look down at her arm display as she scurried past her sister, desperate to confirm their whereabouts.
I can't believe I got us lost,
she thought as she reviewed the miniature passageways illuminated before her.
We can follow the...
An anguished gasp snapped her attention back to Natalea as time stretched for an eternal instant. One of the squad members she called friend barely 8 minutes prior now had Natalea in a vice grip, allowing disease-ridden zombies to crack their limbs against every part of her armour. Claws and shards of bone pierced any weak point they could find. An elbow split her sister's visor in two, and a frantic, bloodshot eye glared at her. Auriel's innards corded themselves together and turned to stone. As her kin was dragged off into the masses of flesh, Natalea's promise seared into her frontal cortex, and Auriel was moving again. Krua splattered against the white battle plate of Isidore and Auriel as Clyra's form thudded to the ground at their feet.
Burn. Them. All.
Auriel seethed. Isidore turned slowly without a word, her guise hidden by her helmet, and set her comrades' bodies ablaze. Julene and Danise didn't utter a sound, returning their focus intentionally on removing Danise's armour plating. Her headpiece rested on the ground, and agony displayed on every inch of her expression. As they slid her dented covering off with loud winces and stifled gasps, Danise's gnarled upper arm revealed itself, a misshapen mess of purple and blue that spanned all the way to her fingertips. The hole left in her abdomen was quickly stuffed with robberant cloths to reduce any more blood loss. Suppressing her emotions as best she could, Auriel continued with a slight shake.
Use what we brought in the cargo to get patched up, Denise. Then you can start searching for other med packs, cure kits, equipment, anything that can help. Julene, after Denise is stabilised, we still need to reinstate the broad conveyance system so we can alert Namika and the others.
The pair nodded in confirmation, Danise much slower than Julene.
I'm going to round the perimeter to ensure there are no further surprises.
Clenching her teeth, Auriel hugged her rifle to her chest as she began to move towards the back of the monastery, hoping her trembling hands went unnoticed. She yearned to run to Danise's aid, wanting to cherish and protect this new recruit against the plagues of the galaxy. But Auriel couldn't trust herself to help, not this close to another episode. She took in the wreckage of each building as she passed. Walls that could have withstood centuries of abuse now decayed and crumbling, much like her own internal fortitude. Her worth echoed in every broken pillar, her shame pulsed through each overgrown hallway, her guilt seeped into all the unintended apertures. Auriel's steps away from her diminished team grew weightier, the load of her failures bearing down on her pauldrons. Once out of sight, Auriel turned into the back of the monastery, switched off her localized comm system, and tore off her helmet to sob quietly. Unburdened by her headgear, the dust she had kicked up assaulted her nostrils, bringing an uncomfortable itch to her nose and throat. The scent of charred flesh hung freely on the air as Isidore continued her task. She heard the fire faintly popping, dulled by the walls around her. Tears flowed freely down to the ruined mosaic floor as she panted and heaved sporadically, the cracks in her psyche mirrored in physical form before her.
God, Queen,
Auriel thought.
I can't do this.
Her mind turned to Charity. Raised here, recruited here, now dead here, because of her. She should have been more cautious, more thoughtful, more meticulous in their approach so that Charity could have the opportunity to experience her homeworld once more. Homeworld. This world. Auriel wondered how far this profanity spread. Profanity. Clyra leapt into view, the image of her crooked body hanging in the air a moment before Auriel's gun returned her body to the ground. Another tally to add, another memory to haunt her sleepless retreats. Fire engulfed the image, and Auriel thought of that first scream in her helmet from Gwen. It was much like the ones she had heard on Raum as all of her former equals fell against the Plague Walkers just 2 weeks prior. Her last mission with her sibling. Last mission. Danise's first mission was nearly her last. Auriel was astounded Danise was still responsive with the injuries she had suffered. She had determination, resolve, faith. Denise was exceptional to face down a figure such as a Havoc brother and live. Alive. Isidore's two long-standing companions were no longer alive. Auriel could sense her rage in their exchange, detect her blame. Isidore undoubtedly blamed Auriel for the loss of her friends.
Rightfully so,
Thought Auriel.
being forced to burn one's friends.
Burn. The pink-scarred hand of Julene came to the forefront of Auriel's mind, followed by the sight of her victorious subordinate behind the fallen monstrosity they faced minutes ago. Ever the scout, she had found a route for an ambush against the rotten beast, for which Auriel was grateful. Auriel's mind switched to Namika, Lucia, and Eleanor, whom she had left completely. The blight their unsettling welcomer alluded to upon arrival crept in, and she dreaded the thought of her distant teammates so far away.
We need to be able to reach them. I can't reach them. They're already dead.
You'll end up with more death for you or your team.
Viridia's remark snapped in her ear. Auriel hated her tone, her demeanour. Mostly, she hated that Viridia was right.
I've failed them, Nat,
She whispered.
I've failed the Alliance, the God Queen, the Hallowed Bloom. Just like I failed you,
She finished internally. As her blurred vision rested upon the holy structure's exposed rebar skeleton, her mind melded to the memory of her older kin back at the abandoned ruins as a kid, the metal bar in her hand now a makeshift sword. She swatted at imaginary foes as Auriel cheered her on. Rubble chipped and fragmented, beaten by the weapon as if felling titans. An agitated, horrid-looking rodent scurried out of a lofty debris pile after Natalea struck her mighty rod upon its home. It screeched and aimed to bite whichever child it could reach first. Natalea, ever the protector, jumped in front of Auriel and skewered the rat, lifting it into the air like a trophy while it released its final squeals.
See? I'll always protect you, Ori.
She had said, piking the rod with its fresh kill in what had been the diseased animal's shelter, now a testament to Natalea's declaration. She had saved Auriel's life countless times before and during their service, and every time she remarked,
See?
I need you, Nat.
Auriel fell to her knees with a grunt, her injury sending a jolt through her body as she hit the ground. She looked around at the monastery, aching to ignite the comfort of faith that had fueled her motivation for so long. Hanging high above the ground over a choir balcony, seeming to escape the main area of damage and unnatural aging, a series of illustrations caught her swollen, stinging eyes. She took a deep, intentional breath as she honed her focus on them, forcing a distraction. While most standard art was digitally produced with artificial intelligence, Auriel appreciated that a majority of creations centered on the God Queen were still made by hand, a token of faith from the artist to pay tribute to the martyr with their time and talents. The works before Auriel, painted in a Novus art style on canvases larger than her, were accented in light pastels and muted colours, gold leaf etched into key areas. Every inch around the main subjects were filled with decorations, the artist unwilling to waste a hair's breadth of space. Each gilded detail and dust-covered intricacy began to lighten Auriel's state. The bottom quarter of the first work was crowded by humans, dressed in civilian drab and rough padding, immortalised in brutal melee against heavily armoured, untainted battle brothers. A woman stood in the middle of the conflict, her battle garb starkly refined, distinct and bright. Her expression looked caring, a slight smile playing at her lips, with wavy brunette hair framing her face. Having seen the God Queen's human form depicted with a variety of physical features in other works, Auriel enjoyed how this one made the God Queen feel knowable, relatable, similar to Nat. Her hand was raised, a golden gilded pistol with round, ornate edges pointed upwards at a swirling planet of green and blue hues. Above that, an oppressive male form hovered over the world, his fingers digging into each side of the planet, as a sinister frown twisted his ragged face. Charcoal eyes blistered downward with an immovable gaze. Floating over the tyrant was an armada of ships engaged in galactic warfare. A long, imposing flagship was positioned squarely in the fray. With her breath slowing and returning to a steady rhythm, Auriel's eyes moved to the next masterpiece. Similarities between the first and second were evident: the same rebel woman and her followers, the same starships, the same overlord and his battle brothers. However, this time the God Queen was front and center of this work, her arms outstretched towards Auriel. A radiant sun behind her head melded with an ethereal outline that surrounded her entire body, swirls of energy igniting her aura in a flash of shimmering gold. Behind her, a rift coloured in a gradient of pinks, reds, greens and blues, ripped across a star-studded background as the starships were irrevocably pulled in. The tyrant's form was diminished, now cowering under the God Queen as rebels held him and his armoured warriors down. Auriel felt her heart rate easing as the heat in her skin waned. In the middle of the third, taking up more than half of the canvas, was a side view of the God Queen, now facing off with a lilac, serpentine demon. An ornate blade in one of her hands pierced the creature's chest as the demon's spiked tail rounded underneath them and embedded itself in the God Queen's back, gold blood flowing from the wound. Above the two duelists hovered three otherworldly beings: a grotesque, slime-green mass of flesh with sunken eyes and rotten teeth, an onyx-horned animalistic monster twisted with rage, and an azure-feathered fiend with a sandstone rostrum raising a glowing talon. The bottom of the painting showed women clad in plate armour, akin to Auriel's own, kneeling in front of a massive cathedral. Auriel rose to her feet, the ache in her side and the overwhelming urge to cry fading away. The last image depicted the God Queen descending from a marigold slash in the stars, pointing the same gilded sword downwards as an army of winged, gold-plated women floated behind her. Beneath them, the oppressor from the first two paintings and the four eldritch beings of the third were all crumpled atop piles of bones and skulls.
"And then shall come her glorious return,"
Auriel recited internally,
"upon which every enemy shall be laid low and every vile tongue shall admit defeat."
Auriel closed her eyes, basking in the brief peace that had come over her.
"I can do this,"
Auriel whispered.
"I must do this."
She opened her eyes, then instantly hardened. Looming at the end of her gaze near the fourth painting, a dark shadow blocked the last rays of sunlight seeping in through a broken window. After assuring it was noticed, the backlit figure turned leisurely into a room out of sight. Auriel snapped into warrior mode, raising her rifle and bolting upstairs, paying no mind to her uncovered head or unattended laceration. Cautiously, she turned into the dimly lit room where the intruder had gone. As she digested what she was seeing, her eyes widened, pupils shrinking. Her mouth dropped and her arms slumped, rifle falling to dangle on its strap. A sharp inhale filled her lungs. Where she assumed an enemy would be, a head from one of the zombies was impaled on a metal bar stuck firmly in the ground. The undead's headless body slumped against a wall, tarnished crimson trailing to the middle of the floor. 3 letters scrawled on the ground using the viscous liquid made the rest of Auriel's world blur. "See?"